Hello, church. Today we're going over the sermon Prelude to Wrath, which is Revelation chapter 15, questions from last Sunday. And I begin with a common misconception, maybe is a way to put it, or deception. It's is man generally good? How can I say this really clearly? Absolutely not. I mean, we have a fear. The reason we behave is because we have constraints. We have laws, we have justice. People won't like us if we're rude or mean. But if we look in the heart of man, according to the Bible, we find that man's heart is evil. It's because of the fall. We inherited the Adamic nature. In other words, we inherited the fallen nature of Adam after he sinned. Greed, selfishness, deception for acceptance, pride, they're all a part of the fallen human nature, and everyone has it. Are there some people that are nicer than others? Yes. What's their motivation? Or what's their belief system? What's their worldview? That can change the way people behave. But the heart of man still is self-centered. And the only thing that can really change it and give us a genuine sacrificial love for others is faith. Faith that there is a God who will judge us. And yet, there's not really a change unless Christ enters our spirit and changes our desires and our heart, gives us a new heart. Then that's actually what Ezekiel and Jeremiah both prophesied, that the Messiah would come and change our hearts of stone to a heart of flesh. In other words, make us less hard and more and softer towards God and towards our fellow man. And we see this most clearly. Where can you really see? If all restraints are removed, what do you see of man? Well, we see that in war sometimes, when people have absolute power over others. The atrocities they commit are horrific. And that's the heart of man exposed clearly, because there is the one place we see absolutely no restraints. There was that book about the kids on the island. What's the name of that book? Lord of the Flies. And we see, in that situation, whoever led, whoever had the power, whoever had the followers, could do terrible things to those who didn't conform, those that didn't are objected to their power. And that's just, they were being honest with human nature. How does the third sign relate to the other in this passage? We see in verse 1 that he saw another sign in heaven, a great and amazing, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is finished. Where do we see other great, amazing signs? We see it in chapter 12, the introduction of the woman that represents the church, and we see it in the beast. And this war is against the woman and the beast. The beast, in verse 3, I believe it is, in chapter 12. The woman in chapter 12, verse 1. It sets up a conflict between these two. And the Antichrist is given power to overcome and conquer the saints. And so now we see a great, amazing sign again. What's the conclusion of this battle between the church and the Antichrist spirit that's in the world? How does it end? Even though we're slaughtered, even though he's given power to conquer us, there's judgment coming. And so that's why we see this third amazing and great sign, the 7 angels with the 7 bowls of wrath. And by the way, sneak preview, the Lamb always wins. It can look like, and this is an encouragement for us as we go through these difficult passages where judgment is falling on the earth, that are hard for us to except because we have loved ones. We know people that seem to be outwardly good. We seem to be, and yet don't like Christianity at all. Don't like Christians. And sometimes that's because they don't understand, and sometimes it's because they don't want to submit to Christ. That's the who will be judged is those who don't want to submit to his goodness and righteousness, who want to be their own Lord, who don't care that he's their creator who gave them everything. Where are we in verse 2? Well, it says we're on the sea of glass. It says beside, but literally the word is on the sea of glass, and the sea of glass is before the throne of God in heaven. That's where we've seen it in a couple other places in Revelation. It's before the throne of God. Number 4, how does the Song of Moses relate to this point in Revelation? I read most of the Song of Moses because it's such a parallel to what's happening here in Revelation. And it refers to the Song of Moses and of the Lamb, because the Exodus and the plagues are what's foreshadowing what's happening here in Revelation. In other words, God is almost like prophesying through the events of history what will happen in the end. And in both, God is triumphing over all those who would destroy or enslave his people. And God defeats them. In both cases, they reveal the insanity of their hatred towards God's people by marching in through between those walls of water. How crazy is that? Well, the same thing's going to happen in the end. They're going to gather together. The armies of the world will gather together in the valley of Megiddo to fight against the Lord God who created them. How insane is that? If he can create you with a word, he can destroy you with the word. And in fact, that's what we're going to read about later. The sword that comes from his mouth, his word. And then we were in Exodus. They were free to follow Moses to the promised land, and we are freed and in the promised land before the throne of God. Number 5, what are some of his great and amazing deeds? The Song of Moses, the Song of the Lamb, talks about how great and amazing his deeds are. I was just listening to somebody talk about the incredible wonder of creation, that God would speak things into existence. And when he created living beings, he created this unbelievably complex language. We're still trying to figure out how complex it is. DNA. You can read it forward. You can read it backward. You can take parts of words and read it. You can skip every third word and get a different meaning. You can read it in one way and another way. One language this way, another language that way. I mean, you can slice it up in different sections and it says something different. It is complex instructions to build little machines, and little machines that check reproductive machines that are reproducing to make sure they reproduced it accurately, and then that go send a signal to another machine if it's inaccurate to go in and fill it in and fix it and make it accurate. I mean, the complexity is enormous. There are literally thousands of machines in every cell in your body. It is utterly amazing. And all those machines have written instructions on how to operate. They are like a computer program, only a million times more complex. And because we're fallen, and because this world is fallen, slowly, little by little, in fact, every generation has 100 new mutations, every generation. And what that tells us is we are devolving, and before too many more generations, we will be so mutated that we will cease to exist. Of course, Jesus will come back before then. That's about 200 generations from now, but he will be back before then. But we're talking about his great and amazing deeds. Sorry, I got sidetracked on DNA. That is one of the wonders. Life itself, what is it to be alive? What is it to be conscious? What is it to be able to create and communicate? We take it for granted. Different species for different realms. Sea creatures, sea creatures that live in the reef, sea creatures that live thousands of feet under tons of pressure. How does all this? God made everything for every different habitat on the earth. The sky, birds that live in the sky, insects that are the tiniest to the little sea creatures like krill that feed whales. I mean, it's all just so complex and beautiful and complicated. I hope that we can get Bruce Malone here to share some of the wonders of creation that tell us how ridiculous it is to believe that things evolved on their own, just happened by chance. In other words, you take some tiny thing that chemical that suddenly comes to life. Well, all life has that complex DNA code, and they cannot begin to explain how it happened. So now they're saying that some space creature dropped it here. And I say, Amen. And his name is God. the the judgment, a great amazing deed, the flood. We have signs of it all over the planet. There was a time when God took mankind down to 8 people. It happened historically. And in fact, almost every culture in the world, if you go far enough back in their history, they have a story of a worldwide flood. The cross, that's probably the greatest and the most amazing deed that the Son of God would become incarnated. First of all, that is incredible. Just that God would become one of us and then lived a sinless life and died in our place. That is the greatest and most amazing deed, the redemption. Number 6, what's implied by all nations? People from all nations. It doesn't mean, when it says all nations will worship him, it doesn't mean that every single person in every nation will come to New Jerusalem and worship him. However, it does mean people from all nations will come and worship him. It's a part of, it's the Greek grammar here that helps us understand that. And who will fear God? Well, all people will fear him. I mean, when he returns and judges the earth, mankind is going to realize how horrific sin is and how much God detests sin, because it's destructive, it's anti goodness, anti godliness. It is evil and wicked and harmful and destructive. And so Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. That's his MO and everything. And so God hates that and must deal with it because he is just and holy, and thank God that he will deal with it. So either we will joyfully embrace the fear of God and his justice, knowing that it's been met on the cross, or we will do so with trembling, acknowledging being forced by the reality of his presence to acknowledge that he is all-powerful and that we are in big trouble. It will be, in that day, there will no longer be a choice whether to fear God or not. Everyone will fear God in one way or another. And number 8, where do the bowls of wrath come from, and how do we know? Well, they come out of, this passage here says they come out of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. They come out from where God is enthroned over the Ark of the Covenant. And how do we know that? It's because the seraph brings these angels the bowls. Seraph is one of the seraphim, the 4 seraphim that fly around the throne of God. Very unique beings that guard and protect the holiness of God. and give him praise continually. And one of these beings that's closest of all beings to God brings the bowls and from God's presence to these seven angels. Number 9, on who does the wrath of God fall? Well, here we clearly see it's those who have taken the mark and worshipped the beast. Now, and we saw before that in the Old Testament, um, observing certain of the Jewish holidays like Passover was said to be a mark. So is this literally a mark, or is this the fact that you have pledged your allegiance to the beast and that you participate in what he asks of us? I really don't know. It could be a physical mark, or it could be our behavior, which is something that we see in the Old Testament called a mark, and all of Revelation comes out of the Old Testament. It's when you look up all the background verses and see how the words were used in the Old Testament, it is just amazing how God took the wording of the Old Testament to show us what is coming. Number 10, and what spoke to your heart? For me, I mean, there's a number of things, but that song at the end. We had to edit it from the YouTube version because it's copyrighted, so we couldn't show it on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. But look up Song of Moses by Brooklyn Tabernacle on YouTube, and there's a couple of one or two places where it's still up. The original one is no longer up on YouTube, but there's some people, I guess, got permission somehow to show it and have displayed it. That soloist, every time I hear it, I get goosebumps. It's just incredible worship, and it just so reminds me of he sings the first 4 verses of what we studied in this passage, chapter 15, and wow, worship, just praise to God for who he is. It's powerful. And also, I guess what hit me is how to express this, the seriousness of sin and the consequences of sin, the magnitude of God's abhorrence of sin. And so I mean, sometimes we go along in life and we forget how we just forget this fact that sin is so damaging and so ugly, and we not necessarily compromise, but we just take it lightly. And when we do, that's a dangerous thing. I think we're just by not having that same attitude that God has towards sin, we're lacking the fear of God, and that's a dangerous thing. It just reminded me again how important the fear of God is, and to always want to be in his will, because that's good. That is goodness, is doing his will, walking with him, serving him, loving others. And when we slide out of that into selfishness, self-centeredness, it's a dangerous place to be for ourselves. If we really were concerned about our own good, we would be and understood God and his ways, we would be walking as close to God as we could, because that is the very best thing for us. So it just reminded me again, and maybe more so than ever, the importance of walking in the Spirit and being right with God in our thought life and in our actions and in our attitude towards the things of life. So I hope this has been a blessing to you. We still have we still have a ways to go through this. Next week is the vials of wrath. And then chapter 18 is the destruction of Babylon. And then even the beginning of 19 is the saints' response to the destruction. So we still have a ways to go through this heavy section. It's important. It's needed. I think it's a timely thing. Hey, the angels, when you think about those three angels that fly directly overhead, we saw towards the end of chapter 14, they're going to be emphasizing what these three chapters are talking about. Chapter 4, 15, 16, 17, and 18, and even the beginning of 19. That's their emphasis. The gospel, the fall of Babylon, and not taking the mark. And that this is the consequences of taking the mark. That's what we'll be digging even deeper into in the coming chapters. So thanks for listening. I hope you have a blessed week.